Today, I want to share a bit of learning from what I've learned recently about recruiting from the Philippines. So this has changed over the last few years, and I think perhaps wasn't as well recognized by some companies and even some practitioners, just because COVID happened and everyone kind of lost their minds a little bit in COVID. But now, because people are now bringing people from offshore again, the Philippines is generally one place where recruitment happens from. So in a few years back, essentially what happened in the Philippines is that the Philippines created this program of accreditation for employers wanting to seek people coming out of the Philippines. This process essentially required that employers would be accredited by a national authority in the Philippines to be able to bring people into Australia or other countries and be able to sponsor them on work visas. So essentially, the program was created as a result of an increase or a recognition of human trafficking of Filipino workers, which is horrendous. And what then happened was that there were steps required for accreditation. There is also within these steps a series of documents that need to be signed off, generally by an executive team or the important people or the top kind of people in the organization, to ensure that there is a responsibility for the Filipino workers once they end up in the country that we're intending to put them in. So for my purposes, it would be Australia. And what that means essentially is that in some cases, it might be that there is a personal responsibility on one person within your organization that is personally responsible for these people, and that they would sign off on something to say that. So and so that obviously is something that a business needs to consider, who that person would be. What does that look like? What does that responsibility look like? In addition, there's some other employment terms that need to be considered. Things like life insurance and health insurance are requirements of hiring foreign workers. So they are things that also need to be included in your employment contracts. And when this accreditation process happens, generally processing times at the moment are about 6 months. So what happens is, so as an employer, you decide that you want to sponsor people from the Philippines. The next step is then to either try and do this yourself, and I probably wouldn't recommend it because it is a little bit of a minefield, or partner with a recruitment agency in the Philippines and talk to them about how they might be able to assist you. I've recently partnered with a recruitment agency in the Philippines to assist one of my clients to go through this process or this accreditation process to try and understand it a little bit better. The recruiters in the Philippines obviously are living in the Philippines, and they have dealt with this process more regularly than what a company has in Australia. So they are an invaluable source of information, knowledge, and just connection within the Philippines. So partnering with that organization then helps with creating template documents or really understanding the versions of documents that need to be submitted. The template documents, some of them are a little bit hard to decipher. And what you want to do is ensure that if you're advising a company, especially a large one, or you are the company being advised, you want to ensure that you understand what is going on. There is quite a lot of what appears to be liability within these documents, but it's certainly something that different versions of these documents can be submitted, or different documents altogether can be submitted to meet the requirements of what the Philippines government wants for you to commit to sponsor their workers. So partner with a recruitment agency in the Philippines, and if you do need one, I have an excellent one in mind. And then talk to them about the documents. Those documents are then collated by you, the company, potentially your lawyer, and also this recruitment agency, and they then go to the Philippines embassy in Australia, and those documents are verified by the embassy in Australia, by one of their arms in Australia. So once that happens in Australia, then these documents are then, the verified versions of the documents are then sent to the Philippines Overseas Employment Agency, and then the accreditation process begins. So when you're thinking about doing this, having this as a part of your migration strategy, this process at the moment is taking up to 6 months. If you're looking at sponsoring anyone from the Philippines, you need to start now if you haven't already done this. It takes up to 6 months to be able to do this process. And so you will need to ensure that you get this underway to make it happen. It is not a huge cost to be able to apply for this process. Obviously, if someone is assisting you to put all the documents together and collate things, there may be a professional services cost in that respect. However, the actual application fee is fairly limited. And then the process takes 6 months. Once you have that accreditation, then you can start to, well, the individuals' visas, once they're granted, they can then apply to be able to exit the Philippines in alignment with your accreditation grant from the Philippines Overseas Employment Agency. So you have a Philippines recruiter, the documents are gathered, they're sent to the Philippine Embassy in Australia. Those documents are verified by the Philippine Embassy in Australia. They're then sent to the Philippines for the accreditation process. The Philippines Overseas Employment Agency then signs off on those documents and allows you as an Australian business to be able to sponsor workers, or allows you to be an accredited employer in Australia. And then any of your visa holders, so they can apply for this once they hold their Australian visa, then apply for their exit permit to be able to depart the Philippines and come to you as the end accredited employer for the Philippines. So quite the process, but something that definitely needs to be considered. The other small thing to note is that and this is only required when you're sponsoring more than 5 people, or so 5 people or more from the Philippines. So if up to 5 people, you don't have to have accreditation, but you still have to have those contractual terms to be able for that individual to get their exit permit. But you don't have to have accreditation if you're only going to hire less than 5 people. Those people can still get exit permits provided that you meet the contractual terms of the Philippines government. Anything over 5 people, you need to be an accredited employer. So something to consider if you're thinking about hiring from the Philippines.